A man ordered a house from Amazon. $19,000. It showed up folded flat on a truck, looking like a shed you could fit in a parking space. Everyone who watched him unbox it assumed he'd been scammed. Then he unfolded it, and the walls kept opening, and a bathroom appeared, and windows popped out where there had been none, and what started as a box the size of a garden shed became a full home with a bedroom, a kitchen, and a living room. That is not the strangest tiny home story of 2026. Not even close. It's not even the cheapest one, and it's definitely not the most heartbreaking one either. And you'll see exactly why in a few minutes. By the end of this video, you'll know about a $900 house being used to get people off the street, a luxury, tiny home market worth over $23 billion, and the one ugly truth almost nobody making tiny house content wants to show you. Stick around, because the last one changes how you should think about this entire trend. Before we go further, if you like real numbers instead of hype, hit subscribe now, because this channel breaks down housing trends the way nobody else does. And we've got 3 more of these stories coming this month. Okay, no more stalling around. Let's get straight into it. Let's start with that folding house, because it's the one that broke the internet earlier this year. It's not a gimmick. These prefabricated, expandable units are part of a much bigger shift. Over 30,000 prefabricated and modular tiny homes have been sold across North America in just the last 2 years, and that now accounts for roughly 60% of all tiny home sales. In other words, the era of someone spending 8 months hand-building a tiny house in their backyard with YouTube tutorials is fading. What's replacing it is something closer to furniture assembly, a flat-pack structure that unfolds into a functioning home in a single afternoon. No crane, no contractor crew, sometimes no permits filed at all, which we'll come back to that because it matters. The reason this format is exploding isn't just novelty, it's price. Tiny homes right now typically run somewhere between $10,000 and $30,000, which makes them up to 90% cheaper than a conventional home. When you're staring down a housing market where a starter home in most US cities costs more than most people make in 5 years, a folding $19,000 house that arrives on a truck stops looking like a novelty act and starts looking like a real answer. But here's the part that actually surprised researchers. It's not retirees or off-grid homesteaders driving this. It's millennials. Surveys this year show more than half of Americans say they'd be willing to live in a tiny home, and among millennials specifically, the 22 to 40 age bracket, that number jumps to 63%. That's not a fringe lifestyle choice anymore. That's a generation quietly opting out of the traditional housing ladder altogether. And builders have noticed. A growing share of 2026 tiny house models are being engineered specifically to stay under the size and weight thresholds that let them travel without a special towing permit, while also being built to meet international residential codes. Which sounds boring, but it's actually the detail that decides whether a tiny home can legally become someone's full-time primary residence instead of just a weekend cabin. That single design decision, building to code rather than building to look good on camera, is quietly separating the tiny house companies that will still exist in 5 years from the ones that were only ever built for a viral unboxing video. Now here's the story that genuinely nobody saw coming. A Canadian builder named Ryan Donnet went semi-viral a while back for something called a tiny house. A house so small it technically wasn't even a house. It was built on a modified tricycle frame, classified legally as a cargo bike, because that was the only way to make it road legal where he lived. People laughed at it, called a stunt. Donnet didn't stop. He kept building smaller, and more purposefully, and this year he unveiled what may be the smallest genuinely livable house ever constructed, just 48 square feet. For comparison, that's smaller than most home bathrooms. And yet it's insulated, weatherproof, has a bed, storage, and enough self-sufficiency to function as a real dwelling, not a stunt prop. He didn't build it to chase a record. He built it, and an entire lineup after it, specifically for people transitioning out of homelessness. Dignified, secure, warm spaces that cost a fraction of a shelter bed and give someone an actual door that locks. This is the quiet side of the tiny home movement that never trends the way the folding Amazon house does. While influencers are showing off hot tubs on wheels, builders like this are proving that tiny doesn't have to mean cute. It can mean the difference between a person sleeping in a doorway and a person sleeping somewhere safe. If you only take one thing from this video, Let it be that the most important tiny home story of the year isn't a luxury one. Okay, now let's talk numbers, because this is bigger business than most people realize. The global tiny home market is valued at roughly $23.5 billion this year, and it's projected to keep climbing steadily over the next decade. That growth is being pulled in two completely different directions at once. On one end, you've got what Donnay is doing, dignity first, dirt cheap, functional housing. On the other end, 2026 has become the year of the luxury tiny home, which sounds like a contradiction until you see one. We're talking warm, minimalist interiors, floor-to-ceiling glass, aluminum frame construction that's lighter and more durable than traditional timber, AI-driven climate and lighting systems, and robotic, transforming furniture that turns a living room into a bedroom with a single tap. Some of these builds are pushing past $200,000 for 200 to 600 square feet. That is not a shed. That's a design statement. And it's not just aesthetic flexing. Off-grid tech has genuinely improved. Builders are now designing roof systems on units as small as 150 to 200 square feet that can capture up to 10,000 gallons of rainwater a year in high rainfall regions. AI-based home automation, tested across several off-grid tiny home communities, has been shown to cut monthly electricity costs by 18 to 25% by learning a household's patterns and scheduling energy use accordingly. Tiny homeowners, on average, are estimated to consume over 54% less than a typical homeowner, which means a smaller footprint isn't just a financial choice, it's an environmental one too. So you've got a $900 shelter unit and a $200,000 smart home, both technically called tiny homes, both part of the same $23 billion market. That gap is the story nobody's really explaining to you. It's not one movement. It's two very different movements wearing the same name. And the design language on the luxury end has shifted noticeably this year too. The look everyone in the industry keeps referencing is warm minimalism. Think natural wood tones, soft matte finishes, layered textiles, and warm ambient lighting replacing the stark white box, spaceship aesthetic that dominated tiny house design 5 or 6 years ago. Ground floor bedrooms are also having a moment, specifically because loft bedrooms, climbing a ladder every night to sleep under a sloped ceiling, turned out to be the single biggest complaint from long-term tiny home owners, especially anyone over 40 or anyone with joint issues. So builders quietly redesigned around that complaint, folding the bedroom into ground floor and pushing storage or a home office up into the loft instead. It's a small shift, but it's a good example of how this entire category is being shaped less by design magazines and more by actual complaints from actual people who tried living this way and told builders what was wrong. Now, for the uncomfortable part. Because if a video about tiny homes only shows you dreamy interiors and viral unboxings, it's not being honest with you. First, legality. Roughly 40% of urban municipalities in the U.S. currently impose zoning or regulatory restrictions that limit or outright block tiny home construction. That folding Amazon house that unfolds into a full home in an afternoon. In a huge number of cities, doing that on your own land without permits is flatly illegal, and code enforcement has been cracking down as these units go viral. People have bought units, set them up, and been forced to remove them months later because local law hadn't caught up, or simply didn't allow it at all. Second, tiny homes still make up a tiny sliver of actual housing stock. In New York City, tiny homes account for roughly 2% of total home sales over the past several years, even in the city considered the most tiny home-friendly market in the country. This is not, despite what your feed suggests, a mainstream housing replacement yet. It is a fast-growing niche, not a revolution that's already happened. Third, and this is the one that got real news coverage this year, not just lifestyle blogs, tiny home villages built specifically to house people experiencing homelessness have run into serious problems in some cities. In Seattle earlier this year, a nonprofit founder who had been working inside a taxpayer-funded tiny house village posted video evidence showing units being used for drug activity and was subsequently removed from the property by the operators after exposing it. That story is a reminder that a tiny house is a structure, not a solution by itself. It still needs real management, real support services, and real accountability behind it, or it can fail the very people it was built to help. None of that means the movement is fake or bad. It means it's real, messy, human, and still being figured out, which honestly makes it more interesting than the polished version you usually see. There's also a financial catch that almost never makes it into the glossy, tiny house tours. Most traditional mortgage lenders still won't touch a tiny home, especially one built on wheels, because it doesn't fit the legal definition of real property the way a site-built house does. That pushes buyers toward personal loans, RV loans, or straight-up cash purchases. And personal loan interest rates are almost always higher than a mortgage rate. So that 90% cheaper sticker price is real, but the financing behind it often isn't nearly as friendly as buying a regular home. And resale can be its own headache too, since the buyer pool for a 48 square foot house on a trailer is a lot smaller than the buyer pool for a standard 3-bedroom home. Insurance is another quiet obstacle. Some standard homeowner policies flatly won't cover a structure classified as a recreational vehicle, which means owners often need specialty RV or manufactured home insurance instead, and coverage options vary wildly by state. None of this is meant to scare you off. It's meant to close the gap between the fantasy version of tiny living you see in a 30-second clip and what actually happens after you sign the paperwork. Because the people who end up happiest in these homes are almost always the ones who went in with realistic expectations, not viral ones. There's also the everyday reality of living in one of these, which the highlight reels tend to skip. Hosting guests is hard. Privacy between partners or roommates is hard. Storage discipline stops being optional and becomes a daily requirement, because there's nowhere to hide clutter. People who make the switch successfully tend to be the ones who visited a model home first, or spent a weekend in a rental unit before committing, rather than the ones who bought straight off a viral video. If you're seriously considering this lifestyle rather than just enjoying the content, that one step, living in one before you own one, is the difference most veteran tiny homeowners point to when asked what they tell their past selves. So where does this leave us heading into the back half of 2026? A few things are becoming clear. Builders are shifting away from purely mobile, novelty units and toward homes that can be legally classified as accessory dwelling units, ADUs, because more states are relaxing laws around them, letting a tiny home sit legally in someone's backyard as a rentable, financeable, permanent structure instead of a legal gray area on wheels. That single shift, ADU classification, might end up matching more to the future of tiny homes than any interior design trend ever could, because it's the difference between a hobby and a housing category banks will actually lend against. At the same time, the technology keeps compressing. Smart appliances built specifically for these footprints are now saving up to 30% more interior space compared to standard size versions. And manufacturers are racing to fit full kitchens, laundry, and even home offices into spaces that used to just hold a bed and a hot plate. And here's the twist I promised you at the start. Remember that 48 square foot house, the one built for people transitioning out of homelessness? Some of the exact same aluminum frame construction, insulation tech, and space folding tricks used in that $900 Dignity project are now showing up, almost unchanged, inside those $200,000 luxury builds. The cheap end and the expensive end of this market are quietly borrowing each other's engineering. The technology that keeps someone warm and safe off the street is, piece by piece, the same technology making rich people's backyard guest houses look like something out of a design magazine. Nobody expected that convergence, and it might be the most important thing happening in housing you've never heard of. Think about what that actually means. Every dollar poured into making luxury, tiny homes lighter, better insulated, and more energy independent is, whether anyone intended it or not, also making the cheap, life-saving version of that same technology better and cheaper too. A rich buyer paying $200,000 for a smart glass guest house in their backyard is, indirectly, funding research that ends up keeping someone alive in a 48 square foot unit on the other side of the country. Nobody designed the tiny home industry to work that way. It just kind of happened, because both ends of the market are chasing the exact same three things: less weight, less energy use, more livable square footage per dollar. That's the part of this story that never makes it into a 5-minute unboxing clip. And it's the part one actually think matters most. So let's recap what nobody saw coming. A folding house from Amazon that unpacks itself in an afternoon. A 48 square foot home, smaller than most bathrooms, quietly helping people rebuild their lives off the street. A $23 billion global market that's really two entirely different movements sharing the same three words. Cities still writing the rulebook in real time, sometimes badly, sometimes tragically, and underneath all of it, a shared engineering language slowly connecting the cheapest homes in the country to the most expensive ones. That's the tiny home movement in 2026. The honest version, not the highlight reel your algorithm usually shows you. If this actually taught you something, do two things for me right now. Hit like, because it tells the channel to keep making videos that dig past the surface instead of just showing you pretty interiors and calling it a day. And subscribe, with notifications on if you can, because next week we're breaking down exactly which states are making it legal to put one of these in your backyard as a permanent, financeable structure, and which ones will still fine you thousands of dollars for trying. You will not want to miss that one. Drop a comment right now telling me honestly which house surprised you more, the folding one from Amazon or the tiny 48 square foot one. I read every single comment. See you in the next video.